but that is God's time, not our time. So we just continue to be open, let Him lead it. The communal discernment of the, throughout the 5 leadership assemblies, it is about communal discernment. It's, we all want to listen to each other, listen to God, how He wants us to become. And our current reality, some of you may see that, some of you may not. 2011, that was presented last year. You know what, we have really hard time getting to this map because we don't have the accurate number. It is to the point that it's the best we can. And some of you may look at that again and say, wait, we have more than that. Oh wait, we have less than that. But this is what our database shows. And you will see that is a challenge with the way we are organizing right now. We have, you can see that the geographical regions have about 102 local communities. Some people say, oh no, we have less, but we have no way to verify, or more. South Florida region have 8, KCLC has 50, and Mong Hang has 58. So you can see the house that what you have prior to 2004, suddenly you double in the people who live in. It's make a big difference. Our current structure is, I want to show you the spreadsheets that we are making.
They are looking for the mouse. There's a laser. There's a laser.
There's a laser.
The one that is the front.
Yeah.
Ah, it works. Yesterday we tried some and it didn't work, so we cannot trust in the new stuff. And so what you look at this on the first line. I think this one
I'm
doesn't.
new here.
On the first one, this is the National Council, the Executive Council, and the committee. This is pretty much the leadership, the national leadership, and the service we have right now. And they all involved. I don't think that we can use this one right now. So just, and then on the bottom, you will see all the regions. Can you move a little bit up, please?
Wow.
The spreadsheet. Move it up so you can see. You can see the geographical regions, and there is a number of local communities. As I say, those numbers may not be totally accurate, but I can say 80%. We can get to 80%. And you look at each of the, if you look down a little bit, you will see each of the geographical region may have EAs, they have chair, NCC, treasurer, secretary, and you have it, they are in box right now, and that's truly, we have multi-layers of governing body. And if you look at toward the right, here we go, those, the newcomers, they came in and look at 40 in KCLC and Mong Hang, and they have the whole governing body. In terms of the leadership, they have the president, secretary, treasurer, and each of the regions also have their own exco. And they have their service, formation, retreat, youth and young adults, and you see it is quite an organization of multi-layers of leadership. So I would like to go back to the presentation. So what does that show to you? So this is what my my observation and also the working group observation is the blessing. Wow, it's a multicultural apostolic body now. Yesterday, Marianne Rao said that, a long time ago, there was a desire, a dream that one day, there are multicolored skin in this body. Now we have it. We have a blessing, but it also creates some challenge that, okay, how do we live together now? We have a broader demographic and membership distribution thanks to Mong Hang and KCLC. They brought in a lot of, they continue to expand with new communities and the young age, especially from Mong Hang. There's a lot of young members. They continue to come in. Yesterday, someone shared that even in the Mong Hang Midwest, they have the pre-CLC group at the age of 10, 12 years old. They start to learn how to pray the initial way, how to be in a community, and it continues to grow. We also have a lot of ministries around. If you have the time to talk to each other, or we all have something to share, or we are doing this ministry, that ministry, but it's still in one region. It's just like, okay, this is our region, do this, our region, do that. But what about the national? We are trying to push the National Program Fund last year, and I tell you what, we failed. Our goal was we will get $10,000 so that we can give to all those national program funds, make it a national and helping spreading, for example, the marriage renewal workshop, the youth retreat, and spirituality program, and so on. And we got what? We got $2,000. It is hard to make it as a, because I guarantee if you do that in the region, you get much more. But that's the reality. And then the expanded National Council, that is a blessing. We used to, yesterday, it was a very, very, I can say it's a sacramental moment for me to see 20 plus member with the ex-official in the NCC. I think we were pretty late because we were checking in with each other, tell us, a little bit of background. It took a long time, but for me, it's so meaningful. So now we have a body of, plus the ex-officials are 26. I don't know what we will do when we do the teleconference, guys. It's a tough one. And our West History exercise that we did in the second Leadership Assembly in 2009 that show us, remember that it's beautiful. We start seeing how God has been leading us, and also, but it also identify our needs and our challenge. So that is a blessing I see, that being able to see what we are facing with. Okay, I would like to highlight a few of the challenges. The first thing I say is it is a complex organizational system. It is a federation of 13 independent regional and cultural groups. We are trying to connect with each other, but I tell you what, it is more a network. We kind of asking people for information and so, but it is not a community. And it's governed by a coordinating council. I mentioned before, multi-layers out of the spreadsheets. And I want to point out the second point here is that dilution and fragmentation of leadership and financial capability. What does that mean? This is my own experience. We have that nomination election process that we were trying to get people to serve on the national leadership. We had about, I think, 29 nominees or so. We have a rejection of 27 of them. Only two say, okay, I'm open for to be, to go forward on the nomination. And I read the reasons of all those rejections. There are good reasons. I think that we all have limitations. And it is about, I am currently serving in the regional leadership. I don't have more time to help out. So, thank you. And it's hard. It's hard. I don't want to be in this position for many terms. And in terms of financial also, we have layers, guys. We have layers of dues. I think that we name it. Our members keep saying, "Oh, I thought I just submit." I said, "Oh no, that is local. I just submit. It's regional." Well, it is national KCLC or national Mong Hang. Oh, national COC? Oh, we have one more? So it is hard. Multi-layers of membership dues, like I mentioned. The other one is the current national leadership. As you see all the boxes, we have a lot of people, but I tell you what, it's still EXCO is the administrative arm. We have 5 people in the EXCO. And I can say that Anne Mary, Liam, Tom Bosch, there is a lot of limitations. We cannot do all. If you see the descriptions, I think one of the things the first time we do is we put in that the job description when we're looking for the nominees. And it's also was a surprise for us to see how much time we spend just doing all those administrative of MCC. So I don't think that we can last that long with that. And NCC is a council of regional coordinators more than governing body. It is, the region send, someone in to represent the regions, and I say, we haven't, since the time I'm here, I haven't seen anything regarding, okay, let's have NCC give the directions to what we have to move forward and so on. We are still, I can say, fighting, but a lot of things is coming in. So, and independent, and also we work through teleconference with a budget limitation. That teleconference doesn't work well, and we try the best. We met once a year, but here, for example, the last 2 years, we spent a lot of time for the reorganization. The service team are quite independent functioning. I asked Pat Brennan late last year to look at through all the committees, and we see that, wow, you know what, we have no communication between. Each have their own goals, and they're kind of going on their own way. In communication, we have the Harvest editor have their own direction. We have communication, the website, his own team. So that is no linkage in terms of connectedness of work. And the poor communication is already the main theme for throughout our organization. Local community, again, it is more of the region, cultural-based mindset. I tell you what, when I was invited in 2005 to go to be part of the diversity and cultural, at that time we call it. And my mentality at that time I came in, I said, I come in and so I can protect my region. Okay, I want to make sure that, whatever I have, I have to fight for it. But throughout, thanks God, it is a blessing for me. It is a transformation journey for me. I got to the point right now, it is not about my region. It is about my national. It is about our whole household. It's not about placing my own room, but it is what is best for the whole community of CLC USA to live out, to call. And the other thing is formation. I think that is one of the needs that we identified at the second leadership assembly. The communication, the formation, and finance. I think that we're still facing that. We're still facing formation. If you go around, the room, you're asking, each of the people in different regions, what kind of formation program you have. There are some have a whole spectrum, vibrant formation program. In some regions, well, we don't have anything. So how can we share that? In one family. And I want to show also the lack of about membership. I don't know about you. Every time we talk about membership in Mong Hang, it's always about, oh, what mean by members? I am a member. I've been in here 20 years. Am I a member? Or I'm one year we have no guideline on what member, and it's very hard. And we go to, our try to see, and it's kind of hard to tell people, no, you are not a member, unless you have something clear, from the whole community. This is what we see as member. We don't have it, and age demographic of members. I tell you what, the survey, one of the survey report came out, and we looked and said, wow, look at this. It's so obvious. If you look at the gray one, is Mong Hang, and the green one is the regional graphical, and you can see the Mong Hang, 90% of them are, it's most of all the young people who fill out the survey. Remember, we have about 660 survey of people fill out the surveys. We think that we have more, probably about 2,000, 3,000, but we only 660. That is one of those we call participation when there is national. No one, we are asking, begging for numbers. And we have, we have 660 people recall, but all the people who apply, who are younger is 90%, and then you can see the people from the Anglophone or the geographical, the majority are in that age. So, and KCLC in the middle. So we have quite a spectrum, and Mong Hang came in with a lot of young people. I think that's a blessing for CLC USA. This is another one in terms of the age range versus number. You just tell you that's out of the number, even though there's we're still facing with the reality. Even 90% is from Mong Hang, but we still not have enough people to be into that young group yet. So this is the whole challenge for CLC, not for any particular region or cultural region. And this one is the membership distribution. If you look at a lot of people in the regional group, have been in this group for in CLC for many, many years. We have much more people younger in terms of age in CLC, in Mong Hang and KCLC. So those are kind of snapshot of some of the challenge. I think that as you discuss with each other, it will surface out of the challenge too. So I would like to leave this one up here, and as you do some reflection, just look at those questions, choosing one of those questions, and do personal reflection for 5 minutes, and then we will have for 15 minutes. And we will have triad, and then we have the share reflection. I would like to check with Father Jim, is that the right time, or we should?
Well, we're about 15 minutes behind the schedule.
Okay.
And that will impact the next exercise. But the critical time factor is when they serve lunch. So we can't go over too much.
Okay.
So maybe 10 minutes personal reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say generally, don't try to figure out everything that you receive. Stay with what struck you during the presentation, where you find yourself, your spirit, but also everyone will have a different interest area, naturally. When we come together, we'll share that. And so you don't have to come to a clarity about everything, concern about everything. Go with where you are, and we'll try to bring it together in the large group.
And so I think that's even something to keep in mind as we move through the weekend, is to sometimes resist that tendency to get down into the details. Remember, as Father Jim shared yesterday, that we're really thinking about what direction do we want to move in as a body as we move forward. So maybe just take a second here and again remember the grace as we prepare to enter into this third exercise. So the process for this presentation is going to be pretty much the same as exercise 2. I'll spend a little time talking to you about the basis for our vision, what were the guiding documents for us, give you some key points, and mention a little bit about how we might transition into our new way of being. And then there'll be 45 minutes for reflection, just as we did in exercise 2. So the CLC general principles and norms, those are our vision for CLC. The principles and norms express our CLC vocation. They are what was approved by the Vatican. They are part of our grace history. A lot of time was spent developing those general principles and norms. And so when this leadership assembly met in 2010 and developed the mandate for the working group, that second bullet expresses that mandate. Our reorganization will be guided by the general principles and general norms of the World CLC community. So that really was a foundation for our work as a working group, and we constantly referred to the general principles as we went through. So that's really a core for this whole vision. And that last point there came out of that dialogue at the Leadership Assembly in 2010. What we are doing today, and that really means today, is discerning how a very large organization, CLC, can support living the general principles and what structures can help do that. So that's really what we're talking about. And that was the direction that the working group received from this assembly. It means that the overarching mandates that came out of that leadership assembly, and I put them here just as kind of a reminder of what our hopes were for this process. This whole idea that we're not simply modifying the way in which we're organized, but that we really are looking at new ways of being organized as a body. This kind of idea of an organic structure that's dynamic and takes into account our current realities, something that's empowering, that's life-giving. Those are some of the words that you use at the Leadership Assembly. And that we become this discerning apostolic body that we're called to be, and that our structures and the way we relate to each other really allow us to be that discerning body. But also recognizing that we are this diverse mix of folks, regions, cultures, and so forth. So how do we preserve and support that and build from where we're at? And then ultimately, we need to look at ways how we come together as one community. And we've certainly been talking about that. And so this idea of becoming one community really was at the core of our vision. And I think as a working group, we kind of evolved in how this became part of what we're presenting today. You know, our general principle number 7 says that we aren't just part of a local community, but we are part of a world community, and the whole church, and all people of goodwill. And so that's the core. I mean, when we look at the 3 pillars of CLC, community is one of those pillars. And we're invited by the church to live that community pillar out, not just in our local community. So community doesn't mean just your local community, but it means the whole wider community of CLC and the community of the church and the world. So, you know, there's a lot of different dimensions to that word community and how we live out that pillar, you know, CLC dimension. You know, so I love that Bible passage, we are many parts but all one body. So how do we bring that together, recognizing and supporting our diverse needs, but also coming together as one body? Some of you may remember the concentric circles image from our last leadership assembly, and this is kind of an updated version of that. And even that image of concentric circles comes from the general norms. And so these are really the elements that we're talking about, you know, that we are members in local communities, that we come together as clusters or groupings of communities, that the service centers are there to support those clusters and our various affinity groups. And then that we have national service offices that essentially help coordinate and facilitate those service centers. And then we have the Executive Council, which provides management and leadership to the body. And then the Delegate Assembly, which is kind of the ultimate governing or leadership body. You know, and that's all part of the world CLC and feeds into the church and into the world. And so that arrow going across the middle there is our creative attempt to show that there's a dynamic across all those concentric circles. So what's a simple way to kind of show what we are trying to envision here? And so if we can boil down the vision that we're presenting here, there's really just 2 elements. You know, there's the community relations element, and the central part of that is clusters. that we relate together in clusters at a local level. That's where we experience community. And the second element of that is service leadership and the servant network. So how do we support our body in living out the CLC way of life? And so I'll say just a little bit more about those, but I think I encourage you to keep reflecting back on those, that these are kind of the core things. Servant leadership, how do we serve the body, and then how do we experience a wider, how do we become one body and experience that in our relationships and clusters. So again, clusters are where the CLC USA structure comes together, and I'll say in our discernment as a working group, the clusters was really something that we found clarity on fairly early in our discernment. It was one of those things where we recognized this is part of our current reality. You know, where our community is vibrant tends to be where communities are clustered together. You know, what is that saying to us? And there's actually a long history of this idea of clusters in the CLC body. So the clusters really are that place where communities form relationships. It's where a local community actually begins to have relationships with other communities. It's a place where our leadership comes from. I mean, sometimes we talk about the us and them idea of national leadership and everybody else, and you know, what are they doing in national leadership? Well, we're all leaders. I mean, and the leadership needs to come from the body. Services are delivered in clusters. I mean, if we're going to support communities, that needs to occur where the communities are, in the clusters. And so that's where many members are going to experience CLC life, is at the clusters. And that's where they're going to be invited to really be involved in CLC at a larger level. So this is just kind of this image, a circle image of showing how this all just kind of is a big circle, flowing from the clusters and flowing back to the clusters, so that, you know, clusters are the ones that discern delegates from the delegate assembly. The members of the executive council come from the delegate assembly. The executive council provides management and collaborative oversight with the national service offices, which flows into the service centers, and the service centers serve the clusters. And that's just kind of a flowing process there. And then out of the clusters really is where we reach out to the world. I mean, that's where we're apostolic. That's flowing out of the clusters, and that's where, in a lot of ways, that sense of shared mission really fundamentally can occur within a cluster. I want to say a little bit about affinity groups and cultural groups. When I say affinity groups, I'm not just speaking about the cultural groups that exist, but there's all kinds of different interests and ways that we might come together based on age, based on some kind of certain particular mission we might be called to. So how do we support the diverse needs of CLC communities? And so we've identified at least a few ways in our vision that might occur, but I will also say that this is something we will need to live into. I think there is going to be more clarity that will need to be developed, and you know, we didn't figure this all out. And the body is going to need to engage with us in terms of what maybe more formal structures might be needed to support the diversity in our body. But some of the things that we discerned are that clusters consist of communities from one affinity or cultural group. So you could have a cluster of maybe all young adults, maybe all Korean, all Vietnamese, whatever, or they can be a mix. But that is one way that we can support our diversity. The service centers are there to serve the needs of affinity groups, so we'll certainly be drawing on the experience we already have on serving our various cultural communities and developing those service centers. So we're not going to lose that. We're going to be bringing that there to serve them. Our idea is that informal network can form in the body. You know, this isn't something that's going to be directed from above, but you know, informal network can form among cultural groups. Maybe all the young family folks want to form an informal network. We want to be able to be organic. We want to be able to allow people to respond in different ways, to come together and develop relationships. And finally, as I said before, the leadership needs to reflect that diversity. So the leadership will be coming from all these clusters and all these different groups. And so the desire is that we structure the way our leadership comes together in a way that it does represent the members of our body. So let me say just a little bit about that idea of servant leadership network. And there's two main points here that I want to make. One is that servant leadership network really flows throughout the body, from the local community all the way to the delegate assembly. So there's a whole network here that flows throughout the body. And then this idea that the service network is all part of one team. I mean, it's all CLC USA. It's not a bunch of different entities. And so the vision is, how do we bring together all the services that exist in our body now into a service network that's all together and working as one team and one group? And this is kind of a visual image of that. I don't know if this works or not. But you'll see here that we have the Executive Council and then the various national offices around that. So you might view this as kind of the national leadership team. These folks are working together as a team. You know, there are Executive Council members that will be direct links to these different national offices. And so seeing this really as a team that's working together to support the service centers that are delivering services to the different clusters of communities, and seeing that this is a two-way street. You know, because again, the people that are in here are coming from the clusters, and the experience from the clusters is informing what's happening here. And as a discerning body, all these folks have to be working together. So let me just say a little bit, because I know some people think about, well, how are we going to evolve from where we are now to this maybe new way of structuring ourselves? So I want to point out a couple things in the transition, because the transition is both personal and communal transformation as well as implementation. So there has to be a transformation process that occurs. It's not simply just an implementation plan, let's go do this. There has to be transformation that occurs in the body to make this work. So part of this process will be really sharing this with the body and inviting the body into this transformation process, living into the mystery of what this might be. You know, I think somebody shared the reference yesterday about the yes from Mary, you know, not knowing really what that yes really meant. You know, so we do have to kind of live into what this is, and then allow that living into it to inform how we continue to journey forward. I think one thing that we'll keep emphasizing is building from what exists. So a lot of what we're proposing is out there somewhere. It's not something we're creating from scratch. And so it's really drawn in from what is out there, all that's good and wonderful, and learning from maybe things that didn't work. Evaluation and adapting has to be part of this whole process. So we have to, as a body, be continually looking at, well, what's happening, how's this working, and maybe modifying our direction a little bit as we move forward. So I invite you now to maybe take, is it how many minutes, 10 minutes? 10 minutes to do some personal reflection. You know, what are your feelings here? You know, what are the clarities for you, the consolations that I presented? What are the desolations? What discerns or concerns you? And I encourage you to even think about maybe jotting a few things down, so that you just kind of have that with you as you continue through on the discernment journey. This presentation will have 3 parts. The total will be about 15 minutes or so of actual presentation time. I'll be talking in the first part about membership, then a little bit about community membership, and the third part will be about clusters. And after each part, I will pause briefly so you can kind of gather your thoughts about what I presented on that particular topic and jot some things down. So there'll be a few moments of reflection time in between each part of the presentation, so that this doesn't all just kind of mush together for you. Then when I'm completed, Lois and Father Jim will give you a little bit of input for the small group, for the personal reflection and small group sharing and so forth. You'll have a pretty big block there of a couple hours of time for a little bit of personal reflection, and then time in the small groups, and they'll share a little bit more with you about what that's all about. And then we'll come back together again in kind of a large group session that will also take about an hour or so.
To personal reflection.
Right, so there's personal reflection after each part, and then there's the personal reflection after all presentations.
And that's good.
Right, that should be small. That should be small group. So that's the error of this presentation. You found it. Isn't that a Quaker thing or something? You put a mistake.
Just testing us to see if they'll
You know,
wait.
the Quakers, like when they make quilts, they always put a mistake in the quilt because the quilt can't be printed. Anyway.
They certainly support human imperfection.
Yes. So anyway, so let's start with membership. And so our vision of membership is that we as a CLC community need to be clear on who a member is and the process for how a member becomes a member. That needs to be clear, and that process needs to be based on the general principles and general norms, because that's our guiding document. So that's really the foundation of membership. So there are a lot of details about membership that need to be worked out, but the working group wants to make a couple what we believe are key points that need to be incorporated into the membership process, just to highlight for our discernment here. First, the membership process needs to incorporate commitment. So there need to be phases of membership. You know, we have a new member, but then there has to be the temporary commitment and permanent commitment, and that needs to be part of our process. I mean, that's in our general principles and norms, so that's about who we are. And it's a part of this whole aspect of living out CLC as a vocation, as a lay vocation. So that's part of who we are, so that has to be in our membership process. We need to make provisions for other forms of membership, and again, this is something that will have to be fleshed out, but there are two areas in particular that we think need to be considered. One is we need to make provisions for those members that choose or are not able to make a commitment, for example, and for whatever reason are not able to be part of a community any longer. So how do we make provisions for including those members in our CLC community? And look at diaspora membership maybe as more of a temporary situation, but how do we make sure that those people are connected to our body? We included this financial co-responsibility piece in the membership aspect because we think that's a critical part of membership. Obviously, there are a whole host of things that have to be dealt with the whole financial kind of thing, but that's a part of being a member is contributing or sharing the financial responsibility for CLC. So we had a couple points on our discernment that we think are important to consider when we talk about this idea of financial co-responsibility. And one is the idea that members make pledges and contribute directly to CLC USA. So the pledge is made directly to CLC USA. There's an expectation that members do share that co-responsibility, but the ability to pay shouldn't exclude members. So we need to account for that. And then the idea that financial resources are shared by the body as a national body. So again, this is getting back to this idea that we are all one body. And how do we reflect being one body in the way that we deal with finances in our body? So who's responsible for the membership process? At least in the model that we're proposing, the Delegate Assembly and the Executive Council are ultimately the accountable bodies. The NCC in our current structure would be there. And so they ultimately are accountable for ensuring that these processes are developed. They may not specifically develop them themselves, but they need to make sure that they are developed with formation teams or whoever needs to be involved in making sure that membership process occurs. And they're ultimately responsible for adopting that membership process. But the clusters also play an important role in this process as well, because that's where the experience of being a member occurs, is within the clusters. So when we talk about transitioning to this new structure, clearly defining membership and the membership processes are kind of a critical initial step. Because if we don't know who our members are, how can we move forward? And that's part of our current reality now, is we really don't know who our members are or where they are in their membership journey. So this has to be something that we need to attend to kind of as a first step in our transition. So that's part one. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and give you a chance to just jot down a few things from this first part, feelings that you had, things that energized you, things that may have been a concern for you. So you just have a chance to record those before I move on to the next part of the presentation. So I'll give you a few minutes just to reflect on your own. Okay, I'm gonna. And the handouts that you got will also have handouts like that for exercise 4. So a lot of the points that we're making are on those handouts. So that's something that you can take with you to your small group sharing and spend some time reflecting over it as well. So the second part is our vision of community. In a similar fashion as I talked about membership, we need to be clear about our processes for how a community becomes a member community. And again, those processes need to reflect the CLC general principles and general norms. So a couple points that we think are important as we think about communities and the community membership process are that, as it says in our general norms, each community needs to have a community guide and a community coordinator to support the community in their formation. Now, obviously, right now we don't have enough guides available to do that, and that's something we'll need to attend to. But I think when we think of member communities, a theoretical part of that formation process is the guides and the community coordinators. So that's something we need to continue to strive toward being able to provide. We also need to be aware of what phases exist in the community membership process. And we've just identified 2, but there could actually be more phases than that. But the idea is that there needs to be a pre-community phase when a community actually is an initial formation. We need to be clear what's included in that initial formation process. And then there needs to be a process for how a member or a community becomes a member community. How do they discern to be a member community? And how are they accepted into the CLC USA body as a member community? And then how does that continuing journey of formation occur after they become a member community? Because it doesn't just stop once you're a member community. So we need to think about what those phases are and be clear about that. And support the guides and coordinators in leading that formation process. And like for membership, the responsibility for community membership again resides with the Delegate Assembly and the Executive Council, or the NCC in our current model. They need to be responsible for ensuring that guidelines are developed for community formation for each phase. And obviously they would do that in collaboration with formation teams and so forth, in developing those processes. There need to be some kind of reporting or application process that community guides and coordinators would use when a community might be ready to be a member community. And then the process of accepting the community through the Delegate Assembly or the Executive Council, that process needs to be clear so that a community actually is accepted and acknowledged as part of the wider CLC USA body. And like membership, this is really a critical initial step for proceeding, because obviously if we don't know who our member communities are, it's kind of hard to move forward with forming clusters or doing much of anything. So we would see this as an initial step in our transition to the new structure, spending time with these membership processes. So with that, I'll pause again and let you just jot down a few notes, about what I presented, or even maybe what I didn't present. What energizes you, what concerns or issues do you have? How do you feel after I presented that part? Does it excite you? Does it make you unsure? Does it raise concerns or reservations? So clusters, as we shared in the first vision, are really a central part of our vision for CLC USA moving forward. And we see them really as the most basic grouping of communities, and the intent really is to bring the experience of wider CLC community and support closer to the local community level. Because there are really a lot of communities out there that have no experience of wider CLC life. So we see clusters as a way of trying to bring that experience closer to our communities. So this formation and support piece is really a central element of our vision. The idea is that the formation network really, ends at the cluster level. That's where the community guides and the community coordinators are helping communities form. And it's where the formation teams that might be at the service center level, they're supporting those guides and those communities to form CLC communities and community life. So really, in a lot of ways, we see formation and support as a fundamental role for clusters. And clearly, formation was one of the priorities that was identified in some of our earlier leadership assemblies. As I noted, this whole experience of CLC community, begins in the clusters. Most people may only experience wider CLC community within a cluster. I know I can speak specifically for the Northwest. A lot of our communities have not experienced community life beyond their local community. So really forming them into clusters provides that wider experience. But I think we also realize that, these clusters already exist pretty widely in our CLC body. Our survey, I think the number was 80% or something, identified that they believe they were part of a cluster. So this is not a new thing. It's not something we need to start with from scratch. And clusters are really where the service leadership comes from. You might consider it kind of a locus of leadership development. The cluster coordinator at the cluster level really is a part of that larger leadership network. So the leaders that exist in the cluster are kind of the local part of our leadership network in CLC USA. The community guides and coordinators provide leadership and are part of that leadership network through the formation aspect of servant leadership. Of course, the clusters discern the delegates for the delegate assembly, so they are identifying who the leaders are in their communities and sending them to the delegate assembly. And then nominations for other CLC's leadership positions are going to be coming from the clusters, and ultimately the people will come from the clusters. So clusters are a critical aspect of leadership within CLC USA. So what are kind of the key characteristics of clusters that we think are important? One is that all communities need to be part of a cluster. So it's not okay for a community just to kind of be off by themselves. They have to be part of another group of communities so they experience that wider community life somehow.
Waiting for a new balcony, maybe you bring it closer.
So a cluster, as I mentioned earlier, it might be all of one affinity, all one cultural group. And of course this idea of affinity is really part of CLC USA. I mean, people come together because of their affinities. They form communities because of their affinities, and so that aspect can also occur at the cluster level. Communities generally are geographically close that are in clusters, but there could be possibilities where a community might be far away. I know that Paul and I were just talking. There isn't a cluster in Anchorage. They're out there all by themselves, so they would probably connect with one of the clusters that are in Washington State. So we have to account for the idea that a community might be off by itself somehow, and we need to somehow figure out how it can connect with the cluster somewhere. And then this idea that clusters are organic. They can evolve and grow. And in fact, we would hope that clusters would grow. And then as they grow, they may split and form other clusters. So clusters are not static. It's not like once you have the Cincinnati cluster, that's how it is forever and ever and ever. They can change. So again, where does the responsibility for creating cluster occur? Well, there's certainly a local element to this because local communities need to be involved in discerning what clusters they're part of. So certainly the discernment for being in a cluster occurs within a local community, but there have to be processes for how that occurs. And so again, the Delegate Assembly and the Executive Council are responsible for ensuring that those processes are developed and that there's a way for clusters to form and that it isn't just a totally random process that occurs. And then they also are responsible for accepting clusters into CLC USA. So there is some chain of accountability that occurs in forming clusters. So one of the graces we had in this process was going back and finding things from our past. Marie Schimmelfinning actually went into the archives and found lots of wonderful gems for us. And this was one of the gems that we found. And it's really a wonderful summary of everything I just presented to you. But this document was created in the 1980s. It's a proposal from to the Delegate Assembly from the CLC Executive Council at that time regarding clusters. And I'm going to read this directly to you. You may have a little trouble reading this. When we found this and read it, it was really a wonderful affirmation of our discernment as well. So it says, whereas in the past we've had various degrees of success organizing ourselves in clusters, whereas CLC is grassroots church and needs to be experienced as such, whereas the local community can most easily experience the larger CLC community in cluster, whereas national growth can best be assured through regional cluster growth, whereas national leadership can best be nurtured on the regional cluster level, whereas formational programs are best conducted on the local level in contact with the lived local experience of CLC, whereas the large size of the USA presents some significant problems in developing a vital national movement, it is proposed that as a national community we commit ourselves to nurture our national and local growth through the establishment and ongoing formation of clusters. It is proposed that the Delegate Assembly and Executive Council be alert to ways in which they can foster the growth of clusters. It is proposed that a formation experience integrated in the overall formation plan be held in as many clusters as possible on a regular basis. ESCO and those whom they designate will be available to assist the clusters in making this experience happen. So that's a wonderful summary for anyone wants this, come and look at it. But again, I think as we discovered in our discernment process, a lot of the things that we were discerning weren't new. We weren't like coming up with amazing new discoveries just kind of out of the blue. So we need, as some of you have already shared, we need to learn from our experiences in the past. So when we think about transitioning into a model where clusters are more central, this would need to occur really after those membership processes and the community membership processes are better defined. So that's when our clusters really would begin to form. But obviously we would really begin forming clusters where clusters already exist. And as we look at the overall transition process, clusters need to be in place before we could have something like a delegate assembly. Because obviously if there isn't a cluster, then the clusters can't select delegates. So there's a process here that we're kind of seeing as laying out. You have to define the membership processes and community membership processes before you can evolve the clusters, before things like delegate assemblies can occur. So that's not an implementation plan per se, but it's recognition that there are things that need to occur and there's a certain order in which they need to occur. So again, that pretty much concludes my presentation, but again, I want to give you a couple minutes just to kind of jot down a few things about clusters before we share with you what's next.
The whole group. But I want to start with, how was that for you? You were in that group for a couple of hours with a pretty demanding task. Could I just hear very brief, word, phrase, sentence, not a paragraph? Very beneficial. Thanks, Sheila.
Tense.
Anybody else?
Encouraging toward the future.
Encouraging toward a future.
Become more clear. when you do it.
Got more clear as you shared with each other. Good. One or two more.
Fermentation.
Fermentation. So it's kind
very
of
bubbly.
very bubbly. That is what happens when something ferments. Okay. All right. So let's start by looking at membership. Excuse me, at membership, which we did first. And I want to make sure we hear from each group. So if you were the facilitator and you're not planning on being the person who speaks, make sure you give that person a signal of some sort so that they know. And I'm not going to ask for reports. I'm not asking so much for a lot of content. I'm asking you to just give us a sense of two questions. One is, as you listen to each other, did something emerge as kind of a leaning? Was there a sense of, there's a leaning around particular advantage, disadvantage, or just a leaning toward based in terms of how positively So that's the first one. Was there a sense of a leaning emerging in the group? The second question I have is, based on the energy in the group and the way, as the conversation that you had with each other, on a scale of priority, how important is this issue for us to have it be a priority as we move forward? Okay? So just really addressing those two things. Really, if this is going to work, each group has about a minute and a half. So I need you to be kind of succinct, but be sure to give us that sense of your group. So, and I'm not going to call out groups. Could I hear from who's ready?
Well, okay, I think I heard you.
We'll trust it.
Well, just a general comment. Our group really felt that in any kind of reforming of ourselves as a national body, that you're spot on with starting with membership and community. And there was a sense of finality, like we're finally here. If you talk to many people who've been in CLC for a number of years, this has been an ongoing conversation for a very long time. So we're excited. There was a sense of excitement and relief, like, okay. But there was also a sense of urgency in the guidelines, and the message that we kind of took away from our group is, don't take too long.
To get the guidelines?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the positive, the overriding positive for the entire discussion was the fact that we're articulating all of this. We're going back to gentlemen's principles and looking at all of this carefully so that there's great intentionality for what we're doing. And the group felt that that's very, very important. And the energy was very, very positive. I felt body language, and I think the session was a long one. We actually went through this without a break, and it seemed to flow. And I think that was very positive. That says something.
Speaking specifically of membership, anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think that there's concern for sensitivity to new members, and the word members itself came up as perhaps not, maybe giving the wrong kind of message, or cold blanket maybe. There was concern for people who have been with CLC, members of long-standing, and how do we transition them in? We don't want people who have been with CLC for a very long time to feel that they're not quite full-fledged members. So that was a concern that was raised.
Thank you.
The consensus was kind of very positive energy and then hopeful. We try not to go into details too much, not get overwhelmed by it, but we just try to focus on the framework and vision of those membership and community and clusters. And in terms of membership, we'd like to have a clear guideline from unified and standardized membership guideline, so we can implement into the local level. And because our community begins with a member, so that's the basic core importance of this our CLC life in the future. Because we lose the member, then there won't be any community. So that's the main thing. And then we had discussion about due and pledges. It's like a little bit